Hello, students, and welcome to Chapter 2 in BUS005. And this is a great chapter here. Let me share my screen with you and open up to the first page, title page here. Here we go. All right, I'm still new at doing this, so bear with me. I may make some mistakes, so it's okay. Make sure you have some paper and pencil handy. Take some notes. All right, so Chapter 2, Understanding Economics and How It Affects Business. The chapter contents consists of how economic conditions affect businesses, understanding free market capitalism, understanding socialism, understanding communism, and trend toward mixed economies. And last, understanding the U.S. economic system. The learning objectives are 1, explain basic economics, 2, explain what capitalism is and how free markets work, 3, compare socialism and communism, 4, analyze the trend toward mixed economies, 5, describe the economic system of the United States, including the significance of key economic indicators, especially GDP, gross domestic product, productivity and the business cycle, and 6, contrast of fiscal policy and monetary policy, and explain how each affects the economy. All right, so what is economics? It is the study of how society chooses to employ resources, population, people, items, to produce goods and services and distribute them for consumption among various competing groups and individuals, all kinds of types of people, businesses, in other words. So we have what's known as macro. It's on the larger scale. It's the study that looks at the operation of a nation's economy as a whole. So all the different countries, and in our case, it could be government, it could be a certain, well, the government for that state. So that's that's macro. So let's look at micro. Microeconomics is the behavior of the people and the organizations in the particular markets. So yes, how does the government function? How does manufacturing function? How does agriculture or technology function? Very important to understand that. So resource development is huge. How do we increase resources? How do we create conditions making better use of those resources? So examples currently are new energy sources. We no longer use coal. So what are we using for energy? We use a lot of solar now, but is there another avenue? New ways of growing foods. How's agriculture growing? Becoming more organic, holistic, and it's very essential because we're trying to remove pesticides and different chemicals from our foods. And then, of course, new ways of creating goods and services on a whole. We always have to be inventive. All right, moving on. Secret to creating a wealthy economy. So Thomas Malthus, he was an inventor of the concept of the dismal science. And with that, he believed that if the rich had most of the wealth, all of it primarily, and the poor had most of the population, okay, resources would run out. And that's just pretty basic. And because of this, Thomas Carlyle, with that, came up with the dismal science. It's the thought that Thomas had, but the title that came from Thomas Carlyle. So statistics show population growing more slowly than expected right now. We've had a lot more people consider the fact that maybe large families are not in today in our society like they used to be. So it's slowed down. When we look at population as a resource and opposing, contrary to Malthus, some macroeconomics, big, our countries, large sovereignties, believe large populations can be a resource. But that means we have to have that population educated, and that makes them really valuable. And we need to remember that. Business owners definitely will provide jobs, which will create economic growth for their employees and communities, as well as for themselves. And entrepreneurs' basic concept is just that, to have growth occur. So Adam Smith said he believed freedom was vital to any economic survival, any economy's survival. So important. If we don't have freedom to grow, it'll stagnate and it'll fail possibly. Freedom to own land or property and the right to keep the profits of a business is essential. So that means it's theirs to own. And then people will work harder if they believe they will be rewarded. Definitely. If you're paying them a paycheck, they'll work for it. So when we think about how we apply Adam Smith's theory, business owners, entrepreneurs are motivated to work harder because they know they will earn and get to keep the rewards from that. When they prosper, able to grow, indirectly they're helping the community, and there's no way around that. So the larger the community grows in the process, and we want that to happen. So what you might want to consider is what might motivate you to start your own business. Is there a need? Can you fill it? All right, the invisible hand theory. Now, this is really important to understand. As people improve their own situation in life, yes, they help the economy prosper. And that's through the production of goods and services and ideas, innovations. And with that comes the invisible hand. So it was coined by Adam Smith, describing the process that turns self-directed gain, the entrepreneur's gain, into social and economic benefits for all. So how do we put that to work? That means that the farmer earns money, as an example, by selling his crops. And to earn more, he hires workers, and that helps him produce crops. And then in return, the farmer produces more, providing more, plenty of food for the community. So this is a growing process. It's like paying it forward. And thus the farmer and his employees all are helping the community while helping himself. So we are paying it forward, but doing it in a way that everybody benefits. All right, capitalism. Money, making money. So in which of all or most of the factors of production and distribution are privately owned. That means the entrepreneur owns them and then operated for profit. So the known countries currently that are known as capitalist systems are the United States, England, Australia, and Canada. But we also have a concept known as state capitalism, where it's a combination of freer markets and some, just a little, of government control. And we're starting to see this happen in China, the concept of where more individuals have the opportunity to have their own businesses. All right, there are 4 basic rights to capitalism. 1, right to own private property. You need to know these things. Right to own a business and keep all that business's profits. I'm not just talking about revenues, I'm talking about profits, money after expenses. The right to freedom of competition, and then the right to freedom of choice. That goes along with what kind of business you care to have. So Roosevelt came about in this time period when these concepts were coming up. And what happened was he added 4 additional freedoms, which are freedom of speech and expression, freedom to worship in your own way, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And we actually know these as part of the amendment rights, First Amendment rights. Okay, so how does free markets work? Free markets about what and how much to produce are made by the market. So when we talk about the market, that could be the industry you're working in, okay? So consumers send signals to the entrepreneurs saying what they like and how they like it. We get this through customer service a lot. Then we realize based on prices that how much of a product they should produce. And that's pretty interesting. So all of a sudden you're making money and people are asking for more, in other words, right? Okay. And pricing says, oh, it's at a good price. We can keep this going because people can afford to buy this. That if something is wanted but hard to get, the price rises until more products are available. That means it reduces the amount of products that are being sold because there aren't any or as many to be acquired. So how are prices determined? Let's say a seller wants to sell shirts for $50, but only a few people may buy them at this price. And this is a really good storyline because if the seller lowers the price, then the quantity demand increases. That means they want more, right? So if they go from $50 down to $30, more people are able to purchase that item. Get a sip of water here, excuse me. All right, so the circular flow model is really important to understand. And on the left, we see households, and on the right, we see businesses. Let me get my cursor out here for you. Maybe. Here we go, annotate, there we are. Let me get my cursor out so I can point at things and mark things for you. Get a second here. All right, so right here, we look at the household, right? And the household, we look at input to payments. On the other side, we look at businesses and input for factors of productivity. Well, once it starts flowing, then goods can go and services can go to households, which gives businesses stronger buying power. Very important to watch this flow in and out from the business to the households, right? Okay, moving on here. And there we go. Oh, let's remove these cursors. Oh, I have to apologize. This is new for me, so bear with me. Okay, let's erase these. It's as if we're in a regular classroom right now, right? Okay, perfect. All right, let me go back here and get my mouse, and we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so the supply of capitalism, very important to understand. What does that mean? That's when the quantity of products that manufacturers, entrepreneurs are willing to sell at different prices at a specific time. Okay, that's when the supply, for the supply, and then the demand is about how much people are willing to buy at different times those prices. And usually we see this around holidays, seasonally, very important to consider. But what we're really concerned about is the equilibrium point, the place where the sales, the quantity and the quality and the dollar amount match. And that's the equilibrium point, the market price. That's how you can determine you can sell the product. So let's take a look here at the chart. All right, on the left is a supply curve. And you see the dollar amount on the left starting at 5.5 and the quantity of t-shirts. And it goes up the supply curve. So let's say there's an increase, right? The need. Okay. But on the right, I'm sorry, yes, on the right side now is the demand curve, which started at 50. That's dollars, right? And it goes down to 50. But if we overlap these and take a look at this, we see where there's an equilibrium point right here in the center. And that is at $25. So it started at 50 and realized that $15 for 25 t-shirts is where the entrepreneur will make money at a good place, where the customer can buy and will buy regularly, and there will be at least that amount of items on the shelf available, and the entrepreneur will know they will receive enough money to pay for the product. Okay, moving on. Perfect competition. And these are the different kinds of competition in the free markets. So perfect, many sellers in a marketplace, and none is large enough to dictate the price of a product. So we talk about grocery stores, we talk about retail clothing stores on street fronts. That's where there's such a large amount of them, right? Okay. Then we have what's known as monopolistic competition. Many sellers producing very similar products, but buyers nevertheless perceive as different. So now we take a look at the difference between Nordstrom's and Ross, or Nordstrom's and TJ Maxx. Extremely different prices, right? And that the prices and the types of products are higher end at Nordstrom's, Saks Fifth Avenue, David Bryant, Tiffany's, those levels, okay? Then we have oligopoly, which are a few sellers which dominate the market. I always like to use cell phones. You guys are very familiar with this, where cell phones, really the ones that are the most common out there are Samsung, iPhone, Verizon phones. They dominate the market. Most people have one of those. And the concept of Android versus a Mac operating system. And then we have what's called the monopoly. And we have only really today one real monopoly, and that's in the utilities. And we used to have a primary one, Pacific Bell, and they were forced to break down. And so it's rare when there's just a monopoly. So what are the benefits? Okay, it's really great. People can be in competition. That's when we see all the advertising and have fun with that. And then it also provides work opportunities for individuals to help them get out of poverty. The more competition going on, that means more jobs open up and people have more opportunity. It's really good. But then on the other side, for a business owner, what happens, we have limitations. Some business owners get very greedy and they don't realize that they're losing the concept of their employees and the business itself. It's all about money at times. And then we have taxation. You will definitely get taxed on your profits when you're making a lot of money. So let's take a look at how tax rates are around the world. And this is a pretty good viewing of them. The blue are the lowest percentage and the green are the highest. And of course, what we see here is Belgium and Japan have the highest tax rates. But in reverse, Hong Kong and Japan have the lowest. Now, the United States and Australia, along with Germany and France, are close to each other, but it isn't reducing. They continue to rise. And we look at our economy about why taxation is increasing and the benefits of taxation. And it'll be further discussed as we move along here. So there are some strange taxes in some US states. We call them fun taxes, strange taxes. And Illinois is one. They have a 5% candy tax unless flour is an ingredient in the treat. It's very interesting. Okay, New Mexico. Need to fix this a little bit so I can, there we go. Citizens that reach 100 years old are exempt from paying state taxes. Why don't we have that across all the United States? Minnesota and others, definitely here in California, marijuana tax of $3.50 per gram. Now, we have a marijuana tax, but there is no set percentage, I believe. It all depends on the counties and the cities. of where where marijuana is being sold. And then in New York, this is very odd. If you change your bagel, now normally you buy a bagel, it's round and have a hole in the middle like a donut, and you change your bagel by slicing it or adding cream cheese. An 8-cent tax is put on your bill. Insane. Okay, let's move on. Socialism, an economic system based on the premise that some, if not most, basic businesses should be owned by the government so profits can be more evenly distributed among the people. What does that really mean? Well, what that really means is that the government will take that money and create other services. And they will have businesses that they run. Now, we see this a lot with social services, so medical, psychological. It also goes along with county funding in other areas. So when we look at the entrepreneur, they're usually running smaller businesses. Citizens aren't highly taxed, but they are taxed. But government's more involved in their business. And their concern is also about the environment and helping the poor. So as I mentioned, providing medical and psychological and other kinds of county services are essential for people. And so there's a little blending here with socialism. Now, there's some benefits, as I mentioned. Social equality, very important, so that the poor have the same benefits as those with money. Free education, and this is wonderful. If you have not gone to college or haven't gone in many years, in the state of California, especially for community colleges, and they're doing it from some universities, public universities, not private, where your first quarter, you have to be holding 12 units at least. Your tuition and your books are being paid for. That's a wonderful benefit. Then I mentioned healthcare. Now, there's an addition of free childcare, which is being added because this provides the ability for people to work who can't normally pay for childcare. It's wonderful. Longer vacations. Used to be a standard that after your first year, you get 1 week, second year, 2 weeks. They're trying to extend that. They've given a standard of 1 day a month for mental health. It's required for every business. And then accumulated time during the month based on how many hours you put in. Now, it all depends on the business. If you're not working a 40-hour week, you may not get all of this if you're working part-time or as a contractor. So something to be considered. Shorter work weeks. A lot of businesses have changed to 4/10s. So you have a 3-day weekend, more time with family, which is really nice. And as I mentioned, more generous sick leave time. Unfortunately, we have some negatives here. Now, this is not good for all business people because this causes a lot of risks. That will still be able to make their profits and products in a timely fashion. And then for those who are on the intelligent level of things, those in management, those who are doing all the mental work, the strategic work, the management work, what happens to these people, and they're considered the brightest people to other countries, will lose the interest in working for these organizations in a socialistic business because they're not getting paid for what they're doing. And we have what's known as called brain drain. They get overworked, compensation isn't there, and so they leave. And then there's also a negative of fewer inventions. People don't get as excited now because a lot of these organizations have you write a contract saying if you make anything in this business, they own it. You don't own it anymore. You may have created it, but it's not in your name. You may be one of the individuals, but it's owned by the business. So there's not that kind of reward, especially if you're working for government. All right, so we look at socialism, though, as being a little beneficial for some countries, such as in Denmark. They are very clean there and wonderful transportation system, as you see by this photograph here. And I can't pronounce it, Holger Tajrup, I believe, in Germany. It's a beautiful location. But in Greece, what happened is they were spending too much money and they ended up in a major debt situation. So you have to be careful when the government comes in and controls the money. So what other factors might lead to slower growth in socialistic countries? Something to think about. All right, communism. Let's get a sip of water here. All right. Okay. It's an economic and political system where the government makes almost all economic decisions and owns almost all major businesses and production. And this is really bad because what happens is the prices don't reflect demand. Prices can be very high, but the demand can be extremely high. So it doesn't matter. And that means there's a shortage. And we see this. We've seen this in Russia and Germany. We've seen this in Middle Eastern countries. When the dollar values change, especially in Asia, very, very sad to see happening. And the most important thing is we don't want people to be without food and clothing and, of course, shelter. And so that puts them into severe economic depression. And you don't need to have that country or any country have that happen to them. So we want to have what's more of a free market economics, really the capitalistic, what we have here in the United States. So it helps because the market largely determines what goods and services get produced. So it's based on what the consumer wants, and who gets them and how the economy grows. So that's really more a normal perspective on business. But then we have this new term also called command economics, which is still communistic. What we've seen is that, in which the government, again, largely decides what goods and services will be produced and who will get them and how the economy will grow. They can say, we'll give them more for their dollar, but it's up to that government. And so there's a little conflict there. But need to be aware of these new definition of terms, free market economics and command economics. So neither free market nor command economics create good, sound economic conditions. As I'm mentioning nowadays, communist governments are disappearing. They are getting smaller, as we've seen with Russia, North Korea, South Korea. They've changed. Socialistic governments are cutting back on social programs, which means less government interaction, which means lowering of taxes, and then again moving closer to capitalism. And what's instead happening is socialistic countries are increasing social programs on their own, although we are including the government, but not as fast. Slowly, but not as fast. So what's a better blend? How about a mixed economies, in which we have a little bit of both? And that way, we get a balance here for all people. And we're seeing it right now during this pandemic time. It's very difficult. People are being funded. Our government is releasing monies to help people and providing more services for people because they can't work. A lot of people have lost their jobs. So gross domestic product. All right, the GDP. Need to understand this concept. This definition is very important to know. So it's the total value of final goods and services produced in a country for 1 year. 1 year. So depending on that fiscal year, could be January to December, July to end of June, whenever that is, what is done is it accounts for how products are produced during that time. And we watch this. It's very important to see. So how a company is accounted for, they have to be within the borders, country's borders. Doesn't matter if they're owned by a foreign country or person, but it's within the US borders, and then we calculate that. So when the GDP changes, businesses feel the effects of it. And so let's say, for instance, we're not growing as much lumber. Well, we feel it in other marketplaces, being furniture, paper, anything that lumber may be used for. So we have to pay attention to that. And what that moves towards is our gross output. So that's the measure of total sales volume at all stages of the production. So you have to calculate what happens in the different stages. From when the tree is cut down, how much did it cost? And are you making money now that the tree is cut down? Was it worth it to cut the tree down? And all that has to be calculated. What happens is, on the other side of all this, is the unemployment rate. And we need to watch this. We have the highest unemployment rate ever seen in the United States right now during the pandemic. And this is how it's calculated. The number of citizens at least 16 years old who are unemployed and tried to find a job within the prior 4 weeks. So it's every 4 weeks that we calculate this. And here are the 4 different kinds of unemployment, and we'll get into it further. It's frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal. I want you to look at this chart here, the current unemployment rates just in the last year. Now, we were pretty steady. We have had the lowest unemployment rates known in the United States. Now, this isn't in California, but in the United States across the board. And we were pretty low. People were working. This is really good. The lowest is what? 3.5 here, very consistently for over a year. But here, all of a sudden in April, and we saw it change in January, and through the last 4 months, the first quarter of the year, it jumped to 14.7%. Now, we're in the midst of the pandemic. Businesses have closed. People were let go. Some were laid off. Some had to be fired. I don't like that term. Unfortunately, they had to let go of people permanently, in other words, because the business permanently closed. And we're going to see a turnaround. Now, here we are in June of 2020, and it's showing us here that it's starting to decrease unemployment, which means people are going back to work. That means they're coming off of getting an unemployment check. This is how it's tracked. The U.S. Department of Labor, you can go out to their website and you can see this for every state and city. Actually, it's tracked, and it's very interesting to watch, along with the whole country. So let's look at the 4 different types of unemployment. We have what's known as structural unemployment. And when restructuring goes on in a business, it usually has to do with the fact that the resources are not matching the skills that need to be working there. And so you may get let go because you don't have the skills to do the job. It's a mismatch. Or they may move you to another department and you still can't fit in, so they may lay you off. Cyclical. We used recession here, and that's when businesses have to cut back because they can't afford to pay. And we're watching it right now with the pandemic. And then we have seasonal unemployment, which we talk about climate or contractual situations. Let's say your contract has ended. The climate has changed, summer to fall to winter, depending on what kind of work you do. And if you're doing outdoors work, it'll make a huge difference. For instance, in construction or landscaping. Very common times of the year is the winter months when people get laid off. And then we have, which is really an interesting one that I didn't hear about this for years, but it's not something we shouldn't consider. It's called frictional. And usually what happens is an employee is not happy. They don't like their manager, they don't like their job, so they quit. Bottom line, people are not getting along. It's not a pretty situation. Okay, so we have what's known as inflation and price indexes, and they need to be watched. They're very important. Okay, inflation. When there's a rise in the prices of goods and services over time. And it's usually because there's less products available. And it can go up very slowly. And you don't even notice it sometimes. Now, we're watching inflation right now during the pandemic because there's not very many products available. So people are increasing the prices. They were told not to. It didn't matter, but because it was more difficult to get the products to the store locations, the costs were getting higher for transportation. The prices for the products went up. So disinflation, where price increases are slowing, okay? Even more so. They're not going quickly, they're just going slowly, okay? But it's coming down. So it's slowly coming down. And then deflation, where prices are totally declining. And then stagnation, where they're slowing, but they're going up anyway, just slowly going up. Now, don't be confused between disinflation and stagnation. Really, stagnation means it's not moving at all, slightly up and down. And the other is their prices are increasing, but slowly. And as the inflation rate is declining, which is important. Okay. Now, here's a picture. So you can take a look at how actually what's going on in the US right now. Starting back in 2018, the chart on the right shows you actually based on presidencies where we're at. And so the blue is inflation and the red is deflation. Okay. And we see an extreme change here during 2020 because of the pandemic. It's just expected. Quite a stagnant period of decrease, of depression here. And on the left side is how it's actually calculated. So per capita for the real gross domestic product, you take the real gross domestic product for the area and divide it by the population to get the per capita. All right, so inflation and price indexes. They're a little different. So here we're talking about monthly statistics. They measure pace of inflation and deflation monthly, as we saw in that chart. And then core inflation. So to calculate it, you take the monthly statistic minus food and energy costs, and that gives you core inflation. And then producer price index. Now, we went from the consumer use to now the producer use, okay? So you want to see these differently based on how things are being produced and how the consumer is using things. And the changes in prices themselves at a wholesale level, not on the shelf, the retail, at the wholesale level. We need to understand the wholesale level first, because in between is where the owners, the entrepreneurs of those products make their profit. That's not what we want to know. We want to know the prices when they're selling. So productivity in the US, it has increased. Technology is pushing us, and it's gotten faster and faster, and definitely easier because we have made it easier for ourselves. We're into robotics today, all kinds of technology, any way to reduce work. Talk about the lean processes, reduction of work and waste, and very essential. But unemployment causes can come about because of robotics and increased efficiency in work and business. And something to be considered. We have to make sure we find new employment for people. The service sector, technology has helped tremendously, improving the quality of services, but not the workers' output. The workers' output is pretty consistent. They still need to enter things in for data accumulation, and they still have to produce documents showing all this information. So that's still where work is needed, but it still has not reduced the workers' work or output. And then a new form of measurement needs to become about. We need more innovation for quality and quantity. Um, Again, lean processes would not hurt to be implemented here. So we look at what's known as business cycles, how they raise and fall periodically. And we've seen this over hundreds of years here, and especially going back to the 1700s, we had huge economic booms. So that's when the economic expansion results in higher gross domestic product, but lower unemployment, okay? Increasing the inflation rate and raising asset prices, assets being products, services, goods, tangible items primarily, services being intangible. And then a recession where we base it on quarters, by the way, decline of the gross domestic product. Now, we can also have this happen in bad weather times, bad snows for places, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods can cause recessions also, where the market, the place of where something is being made is wiped out. We've seen this, especially even with earthquakes. And then there's the depression, severe recession. And between recession and depression, two of the most well-known probably for your generation are the 1920s and 50s. Those were war periods. And then again in 2007, when we had the major default, falling of our banking and insurance and real estate industries, where our government was having to pay these institutions to get out of debt, but it affected those businesses. When those businesses fell, people lost jobs. Prices went up. People didn't have the money. People were losing homes. We saw so many people's homes go into foreclosure, bankruptcy. It was terrible. So we come back around, and then we have what's called recovery. So it's this big circular process, right? Now, or we go this way, either way, it doesn't matter, but we're in recovery where everything starts to stabilize and grows again. Hopefully, in the next 5-6 months, things will start to balance out here in the United States and other countries based on the pandemic. We won't have another crash with health issues going on. It's been very sad with COVID-19. So we have to watch with our fiscal policies. And this comes from the government's perspective and how we keep the economy stable. It's not just the government's perspective because we vote for these things also, and having to do with increasing and decreasing taxes and how the government spends money. If we are finding they're spending too much, we can stand up and say, stop. We have that right, even though maybe we have a president who currently is spending a lot of money, but he's helping people so they can be survive right now. Now, if we weren't in such a situation, a pandemic or war, the spending from the government would be questionable. Why? So it makes sense right now why it's happening. And there always are processes the government has to go through to get funds released. They're not just at the sign of a president. And except for in time of war, terrorism, they say, but we're in the midst of a pandemic, which is in line with those things when a president can release funds. So here we go, moving on to what tools we use for fiscal policy and their taxation and looking again at government spending, how they are spending, and the guidelines and policies for spending that need to be adhered to and watched. Unfortunately, what happens a lot is we end up with a national deficit. So that's meant when, as I mentioned, when there's too much spending and money is out, not available, we owe money, and we're in the trillions in the United States. It's terrible, but it happens. And then the government deficit over time, that's the national debt. versus the deficit, okay? And then we have a surplus, which is when we make more than we spend. And hopefully we can have more of that in the coming years where things can turn around. We always have to have monetary policy, which I mentioned, the term, where interest rates are actually managed and controlled by the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, this is when we're looking at interest rates primarily, okay? Monetary policy also works within government in different facets, but in right here is where we look at interest rates, loans, treasury bills, the value. So also on savings accounts. So there's different areas, but primarily when you need a loan and there are things going on, like when the economy is booming, the Fed raises the interest rates, which is good. So if you want to put money in savings, that's the time to do it. But when we're in recession, they'll decrease interest rates. Now, here's the interesting part. We're not just talking about interest rates for savings, we're also talking about interest rates for loans. So when we're in recession also, the interest rates go down for mortgage and loans for whoever may need them, consumers and business. So that's something to be paying attention to. Okay, so this is the end of chapter 2. Glad you were able to join me today. Should you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email, text, or show up at my Zoom office hours, which I've provided you with in Canvas, and you'll get a link to them. They're currently every Monday morning at 10 a.m. to 11. And if you aren't able to make that, ask a friend, ask your peers, make sure you get their phone numbers, connect with them because you're working in teams also. And don't hesitate to do extra research to help you also learn how to research and learn more with the questions you may have on this or any chapter. So I look forward to seeing you in chapter 3. Have a great day. Easy does it.